Wind shrieked across Raven's Notch Pass like a saw on bone. Snow streamed sideways, turning the world into a white blur with no edges. Kellen Boone kept his chin down and his eyes up, reading the slope the way other men read a clock by scars, by instinct, by winter's quiet math. Juniper, his old bay mare, fought the drift with stubborn feet. Then one step sounded wrong. Hollow, soft, the kind of sound that meant air beneath the snow. A deep whump rolled under them, low, sudden, final. The surface sagged. The ridge above cracked. Kellen did not pray. He did not argue. He shouted one word and yanked Juniper hard to the left. They ran. Hooves punched powder. Breath burned. 40 breaths, maybe less. Behind them, the pass woke up. The avalanche came down like an ocean turned solid. It poured. A white wall swallowed trees and boulders. The air filled with grit and ice. The ground trembled as if the mountain had decided to move. Kellen drove Juniper toward a narrow seam in the rock, a crack no wider than a man's shoulders. He forced her forward. Stones scraped her flank. The snow roar was on their backs. They slipped into the seam. The dark held its breath. The mountain slammed the door. Light vanished. The roar collapsed into a crushing hush. Snow and shattered rock sealed the opening like a tomb. Kellen's palm found cold stone. Juniper's breath steamed in the dark, loud and afraid. No trail, no sky, no way out. Outside, Dawson's Ridge would see only a blank pass and fresh ruin. No one would know where the man and the mare had gone. And inside this black throat of earth, a question waited. Was this shelter an accident or a plan made long before the first snow fell? The roar faded. What remained was a pressure so complete it felt like silence had weight. Kellen Boone dug with his hands until his fingers numbed. Snow came down hard-packed and dead, fused with stone. He tried again, slower this time, testing angles, listening for give. There was none. The mountain had finished speaking. He stopped. Waste no strength on lies. Kellen pressed his ear to the wall. Not to listen for voices, there would be none, but for truth. He heard only his own pulse, heavy and close, and Juniper's breath pulling fast through her chest. The dark was total. Then he noticed what should not have been there. The cold did not bite. Outside, the pass would have been cutting flesh within minutes. In here, the air stung but did not kill. It was wrong in a way that mattered. Kellen drew a slow breath. Beneath the scent of snow and fear lay something faint and mineral, like wet stone warmed by sun long gone. He reached into his coat and brought out the small oil lamp he always carried. He struck it once. A thin flame steadied. Light slid over damp rock. The walls glistened, not with ice, but with moisture that did not freeze. The flame bent, tugged by a draft. From deeper inside the mountain, a breath answered him. It was not heat the way a fire gives heat. It was thinner, older, just enough to take the edge off death. Kellen stood still and let the moment settle. He did not call it mercy. He did not call it luck. He called it a sign. Somewhere beyond the sealed mouth of snow and stone, the mountain was still breathing, and it was breathing warm. Kellen raised the lamp and moved deeper, one careful step at a time. Juniper followed, calmer now, guided by the steady circle of light. His hand slid along the wall and stopped. The stone was wrong, not broken by frost or water, but shaped. He felt the marks with his fingertips, old chisel scars, shallow and deliberate, wedge lines, stones stacked where collapse would have been easy. This was not a cave that had merely existed. This was a place that had been worked. The passage widened into a small chamber. The floor had been leveled by hand. A low stone bench ran along one side, worn smooth. In a recess, dry wood had been stacked and kept dry by position alone. Above it, a narrow shaft climbed into darkness, placed just so high enough to draw air, angled to keep snow from choking it. Nothing here was comfortable. Nothing was decorative. Everything was necessary. Kellen did not smile. He lowered the lamp and let the light tell him the rest. The angles, the spacing, the quiet logic of survival etched into rock. Then he saw it. Tucked into a stone niche, protected from moisture, lay a folded scrap of oiled paper. Not dropped, placed. Kellen held it without opening it yet. He understood the weight of that choice. Someone had been here before. Someone had planned for a moment exactly like this. And the mountain, for all its force, had allowed the work to stand. Kellen unfolded the paper with care, keeping it close to the lamp so the flame would not lick the edges. The oil-treated fibers whispered as they opened, stiff from age and patience. The handwriting was steady, plain, built for reading in bad light. If you are reading this, you have already survived the first death. The second death is panic. Do not give it room. Kellen read on, slower now. Food is stored in the hanging boxes. Dry wood is in the second recess. Juniper has a standing place where the floor is strongest. Do not burn a large fire. Keep it small. Keep it steady. If there are more people than I planned for, divide the rations early. Water can be found at the warm seep in the inner stone. The words did not explain themselves. They assumed understanding. They spoke like instructions given to someone who would need them. At the bottom, there was a name, Kellen Boone. The lamp trembled in his hand. He stared at the signature as if it belonged to a ghost who wore his face. He remembered the feel of the pen, the cold of the day he'd written it, the quiet resolve. It was his, unmistakably. But the man who had written it, the man of that summer, felt like a stranger now, a man who had calculated for death without feeling its cold breath on his own neck. The chamber felt suddenly larger and older, not because of the rock, but because of the intention sealed inside it. This place was not an accident. It was not luck. It was not mercy. It was preparation, quiet, deliberate, and once laughed at. Kellen folded the letter back into its niche and let the flame burn low, just as the words had instructed. The mountain had judged him already, and for the first time since the avalanche fell, the judgment was not against him. The letter did not end in the dark. It opened a door. Spring, 1887. Dawson's Ridge lay thawing at the edge of the San Juans, a town built on timber cuts and ore carts. Sawdust clung to boots. Ore dust settled into lungs. Men worked, counted, and worked again, because winter always came back to collect. Kellen Boone stepped into Marshal Everett Hale's office, with his hat in his hands and a simple request on his tongue. He wanted permission to dig and reinforce a small shelter on Raven Ridge. Nothing grand, nothing public, just stone, wood, and time. Hale listened the way lawmen listen, measuring cost before meaning. He asked where. He asked why. He asked who would be responsible if it failed. Kellen answered only what mattered. The town answered the rest. By sundown, the story had crossed the street and found a counter. Evelyn Parlow paused her ledger, dipped her pen, and looked up over the rims of her glasses. "How much work are you planning to bury in that hole?" she asked, already writing the question into the day's accounts. The words spread with the ease of rumor. In the saloon, a man laughed into his cup. Another gave it a name, Boone's Burrow. The laughter was not cruel. It was practical. Men who lived by seasons did not waste daylight on what might never be used. Kellen heard the name. He did not correct it. He walked back into the spring mud alone, already paying the first price of being early. Marshal Hale did not laugh. He waited until the room had emptied and the noise of the street had thinned. "Where did you learn to read mountains like that?" he asked, tapping the edge of the desk. "You talk as if the ridge keeps a schedule." Kellen thought for a moment. Then he answered with a single sentence. From the rail. That was all he offered. But it was enough. Hale leaned back as Kellen explained, not as a speech, but as a matter of fact. Years spent as a railroad surveyor, pacing lines across high passes where paper plans met real wind, measuring grades, marking cuts, watching snow build where men said it would not, counting days while crews waited for storms to pass and sometimes waited too long. He did not describe the bodies. He did not name the winters. He simply said that he had seen caravans freeze because they believed the season would be kind. Kellen took a scrap of paper from his coat and sketched 3 lines. One for wind, one for slope, one for the long white scar where snow liked to run when it finally let go. Evelyn Parlow watched from the counter. Ledger closed now, her eyes moving between the drawing and the man who made it. She understood the marks. She did not accept the conclusion. Hale studied the page and nodded once. This was not prophecy. It was measurement. And measurement, even when ignored, had a way of being right on its own schedule. Reverend Silas Merritt waited until the talk had cooled before he spoke. He did not raise his voice. He did not shame anyone. If a man has strength, he said, folding his hands, he should put it where it keeps the most people alive. The school roof leaks. Winter does not spare children. The room stilled. It was a fair point, and everyone knew it. Evelyn Parlow nodded once, already turning the argument into numbers. Every sack of flour you hang in that cave, she said to Kellen, is a week some family goes without. We don't have extra. We never do. Marshall Hale let the silence do its work. When he finally spoke, it was to draw a line, not a verdict. I won't stop you, he said, but I won't put the town behind it. No funds, no protection. If it fails, it's on you. All three waited for Kellen to defend himself. He did not. He stood there with his hat in his hands, listening as if each word were a tool being laid on a table. When the last echo faded, he nodded once. I'll do my part, he said. Nothing more. It was not defiance. It was acceptance. The argument did not end because someone won. It ended because there was no more to add. The town had made its case. The math had been done. The ethics had been weighed. What remained was the space between them uncertain, expensive, and unanswered. And in that space, Kellen Boone turned back toward the ridge, carrying a choice that could not be shared. Kellen Boone did not dig where the ground looked friendly. He waited. He watched the wind first, how it combed the ridge clean in some places and loaded it heavy in others. He traced the cornices with his eyes, those overhanging lips of snow that grew quiet and lethal above the fall line. He followed old scars where the mountain had already given way in other years, long white slides polished smooth by repetition. He knelt to study stones rubbed round on one face and sharp on the other, reading the direction of force like a handprint. The right place was not handsome. It did not offer a view. It did not promise comfort. It sat just outside the main runout, tucked where a natural draft shaft breathed up through fractured rock. Wind moved there even on still days, proof that air knew a way through. That was enough. Kellen drove a wooden stake into the soil and tied a strip of cloth to it. The cloth snapped once, then settled, tugged by the hidden pull beneath the ground. He watched it for a long minute. Then he nodded. Juniper did the rest. She leaned into the traces and dragged timbers uphill that no man would have carried alone. She hauled crates and barrels in patient lines, stopping when Kellen stopped, starting when he did. The work left grooves in the dirt that would fade by morning. The decision would not. By dusk, the stake stood alone against the ridge, plain and unremarkable. Anyone passing would have missed it, but Kellen knew what it marked. Not a hole, a position. In the arithmetic of survival, location was the first material, and he had chosen it with care. Kellen worked the ridge the way a watchmaker works, a movement slow, exact, unwilling to trust chance. He framed the hollow with lodgepole pine cut green and tight-grained, the kind that resisted splitting when the cold took hold. Where the mountain threatened to press, he answered with stone, not piled, set. Each rock was a battle with gravity, each timber a price paid in summer daylight. The walls learned how to carry themselves. From an abandoned rail spur below the pass, he hauled up old iron wedges, scarred, blunt, still honest. He drove them where wood met stone, locking the frame into the mountain's ribs. The iron did not shine. It disappeared, which was the point. Heat came next. He shaped a low stone bench along the back wall, a place for warmth to linger. Not a hearth too hungry, but a mass that would drink the day's small fire and give it back slowly through the night. He cut a shallow channel along the wall, rough and deliberate, to guide the faint, warm breath rising from deeper rock. It was not clever. It was sufficient. Food was treated like a living thing that needed protection. He hung boxes from crossbeams so damp could not climb and mice could not reach. Lids were sealed with beeswax warmed in his hands, then pressed tight until the seams shone dull and sure. A standing place for Juniper was set where the floor was strongest. laid with timber to spread her weight. Ventilation mattered as much as warmth. He shaped the outlet high and narrow, angled so drifting snow would slide past and fall away. He tested it on still days and windy ones, watching the flame bend, learning how the mountain breathed. The fire, when it came, was kept small, always small, enough to warm hands, enough to dry clothes, never enough to boast. Storms tried the work before winter did. Rain found weak seams and was turned away. Cold crept in and was slowed. The mountain pressed and found resistance that did not argue back. Each evening, Kellen sat on the stone bench and watched the flame steady itself. Nothing failed. Nothing sang. The shelter did not look like safety. It looked like effort made permanent. And with every piece set in its place, the ridge lost another reason to kill whoever came next. The ledger in Kellen Boone's head had always been tight. He counted calories. He counted days. He counted what the mountain would take before it gave anything back. What he did not count enough of was light. The mistake did not announce itself. It waited. Oil burned clean. The lamp stayed steady. Weeks passed in his planning, and the numbers still balanced until he set the last tin down and felt the absence like a missing rung. Too few wicks. Too little oil. In a place without dawn or dusk, light was not comfort. It was order. It was time. It was the difference between a man thinking straight and a man losing himself to the dark. Kellen did not curse the oversight. He named it. He sat with it until the truth stopped moving. Then he adapted. He cut strips from coarse cloth meant for mending and twisted them tight, testing how they drew. He rendered animal fat low and slow, skimming it clean, filtering it through ash until the smell dulled. He tried the flame. It smoked, then settled. Weaker, but workable. From that point on, the lamp was treated like a ration, not burned to make the dark friendly, only to make it honest. Light came on to read a mark, to check a knot, to count breaths when fear pressed in. Then it went out. The darkness returned, heavy and patient. Kellen learned its shape. He moved by touch. He measured hours by heat and hunger. The mountain had forced a correction, and he accepted it. Preparation had carried him this far. Adaptation would have to carry him the rest of the way. In the quiet that followed, the shelter held, and in the controlled absence of light, the work proved something more difficult than foresight. It proved humility. By summer's end, the name had settled into the town like sawdust in a floor crack. At the saloon, men leaned on the bar and laughed into their cups. If someone fussed too long over a job, another would grin and say he was doing a boon. If a man carried more than he needed, the room would hum with the phrase, Boone's Burrow. Evelyn Parlow turned it into a game. She chalked a small column on the slate behind the counter and let people place quiet wagers. Not on whether the shelter would save a life, but on when Kellen would quit. A week, a month, before the first snow. The odds shifted with the weather. Marshall Hale never put his name down. He watched from the edge, arms folded, his concern measured and plain. As long as he doesn't pull anyone else into trouble, he said, more than once. It was not approval. It was containment. Reverend Merritt did not smile at the jokes. He kept his distance from them. When asked, he repeated the same answer, steady as a sermon line. A community needs roofs, he said. It does not need legends. No one argued with him. No one had to. The town had winters to survive and ledgers to balance. Romance did not keep children warm. Kellen Boone heard the phrase, the way one hears wind through boards present, persistent, not worth answering. He passed through town with supplies tied low and tight, nodded when nodded to, and said nothing when laughter followed him out the door. Isolation was not new to him. He had chosen it the moment he chose the ridge. Each joke added weight. Each wager sharpened the edge of what would come later. The town did not know it yet, but it was building a debt. And debts, like winter, always came due. October arrived carrying weight instead of color. Snow fell heavy and early. Not the polite dusting that tested boots, but the kind that bent branches and filled tracks overnight. The wind shifted its habits, carving new lines along the ridge. Kellen Boone stood below Raven's Notch and studied the slope in silence. Above him, A fresh cornice had formed clean, sharp, and overconfident. It hung out from the ridgeline like a blade, waiting for its own weight to decide. Kellen did not tell anyone he had warned them. He did not say the season had moved up its calendar. He tightened his pack and made one last trip. The shelter received him the way it always had, quiet, unchanged, patient. He added what little he could. More hard bread, more dried meat. Not much, just enough to matter. He checked the hanging boxes and adjusted the order, so the first things found would be the least tempting to waste. Then he wrote a brief note and placed it where hands would find it before fear did. Not instructions, reminders. Eat early, count often, share before hunger chooses for you. Last, he uncoiled a length of rope and tied it to a stone ring set near the entrance. He ran the line along the wall, low and continuous, all the way to the warm seat at the inner stone. He pulled it tight, testing it blindfolded, letting his fingers learn its promise. If panic came, the rope would speak when voices failed. When he stepped back outside, the sky had gone flat and gray. The cornice above had grown thicker in the hours he'd been inside. The wind cut differently now, carrying a sound that did not belong to peace. Kellen stood there longer than necessary, measuring nothing that could be written down. He touched the wooden stake, still marking the site, and felt the faint pull of air from below. This was the last chance to add anything. He did not. He mounted Juniper and turned away from the ridge, carrying a certainty that had no name yet only a weight. Behind him, winter leaned forward, gathering its breath. By midwinter, work still needed doing. Timber had to move, wages had to be earned, and Raven's Notch was the shortest way through. Kellen Boone took the lead because he always did. He walked ahead of the line, reading the snow with his eyes and the wind with his shoulders. Behind him came men who trusted his feet more than his ideas. Cal Rourke was among them, broad-backed and blunt, built for pulling logs and pushing luck. Nate Parlow walked a few paces back, quieter, watching everything with a young man's careful curiosity. The climb tightened. Wind pressed against their coats. Snow lay smooth where it should have been broken. Cal grinned into the cold. "If this goes bad," he said, loud enough to carry, "we'll just crawl into your little hole, right?" A few men laughed. It eased the air. It always did. Kellen did not answer. He slowed, listening to the sound beneath his steps. The snow did not crunch. It sighed, hollow, a warning with no words. He lifted a hand, not to stop them, but to steady his own pace. The ridge above them looked calm, too calm. Cornices slept overhead, heavy with patience. The wind changed, just enough to carry a deeper note. The kind that came from inside the mountain, not over it. Kellen felt it then, the pressure building where it should not, the silence thickening. Somewhere ahead, the snow was deciding, and it would not ask who believed in what before it moved. The sound arrived before the movement. A low, spreading whump rolled through the pass, deeper than thunder and closer than breath. The snow underfoot sagged as if the ground had exhaled. Then the ridge broke. White surged from above, fast and wide, swallowing distance in a blink. Men shouted. Someone slipped and vanished to the knee. Juniper reared, eyes wild, the traces snapping tight as fear took her. There was no time to argue with the mountain. Kellen Boone did not try to outrun it. He did not search for a safer line. He made a harder choice. "Here," he barked, sharp and final, and turned straight toward the rock seam that split the slope like a scar. The avalanche came on its heels, a wall of snow and stone hammering the air flat. Trees snapped. Ice screamed. The world narrowed to movement and noise. Kellen drove Juniper first, shoving her shoulder into the dark mouth of the earth. He grabbed the nearest man and hauled him after. Cal Rourke went in hard, cursing as he fell. Nate stumbled, caught himself, and was pulled forward by hands he didn't recognize. A man at the back screamed as the snow took his legs. Kellen lunged, fingers closing on a coat collar. A slab sheared past, close enough to tear fabric and skin. For a breathless instant, the mountain decided whether to keep him. It let go. They tumbled inside. Bodies collided. Someone struck stone and went quiet. Then the roar hit the opening like a battering ram. The door slammed shut, Darkness crushed in. Snow and shattered rock packed the entrance, sealing it tight. The avalanche thundered on for seconds that felt like hours, then thinned, then stopped. Silence fell heavy and complete. Inside the chamber, breath tore through the dark. Someone sobbed. Someone swore, loud and shaking. Juniper stamped and snorted, her fear filling the space. Hands searched for walls, for faces, for proof that the world still existed. Kellen stood where he had landed, chest burning, counting heads by sound alone. He did not move toward the blocked entrance. He did not waste strength on hope shaped like digging. The shelter had done what it was built to do. Outside, Raven's Notch had finished its judgment. The pass was erased. The trail was gone. The town below would see nothing but a smooth white scar and assume the worst. Inside, a dozen breaths fought for order in the dark. The mountain had spoken. Now the reckoning would begin not with speed or force, but with time, numbers, and the hard math of survival. The lamp came on small and careful, just enough to give shape to the dark. Food appeared where the letter had promised it would. Hanging boxes, waxed lids, dry wood stacked clean. For a moment, no one spoke. Relief moved through the room like a weak tide. Cal Rourke broke it first. He stared at the work, the order, the forethought, and shook his head once. "You really did this," he said, not accusing, not laughing, just stating a fact he had not believed in until now. Then Nate Parlow did the counting. He crouched by the boxes, opening one, then another, measuring by hand and eye. His brow tightened. He looked up, then back down, then up again. "This isn't enough," he said quietly. "Not for all of us." The truth landed without sound. The shelter had been built for 2 people and a horse. Maybe 10 weeks. Maybe less, if nothing went wrong. Cal's jaw set. "If we split it," he said, thinking out loud, "we all starve." The dark pressed closer, as if listening. Nate swallowed. "And if we don't split it?" he asked, careful and precise. "Who lives?" No one answered him. Kellen Boone stepped forward. He did not argue. He did not explain. He picked up a charred stick from the fire pit and knelt by the stone wall. In the lamp's thin glow, he wrote a single word, slow and steady. "Share." Cal shook his head. "That's not math," he said. "That's a story we tell ourselves." Kellen rose. He drew his knife and opened one of the boxes. He cut a portion cleanly, smaller than anyone expected, and set it aside. Then he cut again, and again. Each time, the piece he kept grew smaller. He did not look at the others when he finished. He wrapped his share and stepped back, leaving the larger portions where they lay. There were no speeches, no prayers, just the sound of breath in a room that had grown very still. In the light of one small flame, the argument ended not because it had been solved, but because someone had paid first. The mountain did not care how the decision was made, but the men in that room did. Storm followed storm, each one stacking time on top of hunger. Outside, the cold drove deeper into the mountain. Inside, the shelter answered the way it had been taught to answer, without panic, without excess. The fire stayed small, always small. A thumb of flame fed with care, burning long instead of bright. Heat soaked into stone and bled back slowly, just enough to keep fingers working and thoughts aligned. Water came from the warm seep, clear and steady. Men learned its sound in the dark, the soft trickle that meant life still moved under the rock. They filled containers by touch, rationed sips, and put lids back without speaking. Light remained scarce. The mistake returned, night after night. Wicks thinned. Oil smoked. Kellen adjusted the rules again. The lamp came on only to mark a change, to check a knot, to count what must be counted. Then it went out. Darkness reclaimed the space, thick but familiar. The rope did its quiet work. When fear surged, when someone woke, convinced the air was gone or the walls were closing, the hand found the line. Fingers followed it to warmth. Panic broke itself on something solid. The rope never argued. It simply led. Cal Rourke stopped laughing in the dark. He began watching instead. Kellen showed him what to see without calling it a lesson. How wind loaded one slope and scoured another. How cornices grew when no one was looking. how the mountain telegraphed its choices before it made them. Cal learned to listen for the wrong silence, the hollow note beneath snow. He asked fewer questions. The right ones. Nate Parlow kept the numbers. By the weak lamp, he scratched marks into a slate: meals taken, water drawn, days endured. It became a ledger that did not lie. When portions shrank, the marks told them why. When hope thinned, the marks proved time was still moving forward. The slate became a living book, a way to keep the mind from drifting where the body could not follow. Nights were the hardest. Sometimes the mountain shifted, a distant crack, a thud like a giant closing a door. Dust fell from the ceiling and settled on shoulders. Every sound carried the same message. The judge was still on the bench. No one spoke during those moments. They waited. The shelter held. The fire stayed small. Breath slowed. Weeks passed without ceremony. Beards grew. Hands cracked and healed. Hunger sharpened thought instead of dulling it. The work of staying alive became routine, and routine became strength. Kellen Boone did not lead with words. He corrected with touch. He nodded when something was done right. When something failed, he changed it and moved on. The men followed not because he asked them to, but because what he did kept working. There were days when hope rose, when the seep ran warm and steady, when the slate showed a clean line of survival. There were nights when despair pressed close, whispering that the numbers would not add up. Between those swings, the shelter did what it had been built to do. It bought time, and time, rationed and respected, kept the mountain from finishing its sentence. Cal Rourke spoke first, his voice low and stripped of its old edge. "You were right," he said into the dim. "We were wrong." The words hung there, heavy with weeks of hunger and counting. Kellen Boone did not accept them. He did not reject them either. He fed the fire a sliver of wood and watched it take, then answered without turning. "No," he said. The mountain was right. Cal frowned. Not arguing now, just listening. The shelter breathed. Warmth moved along stone like a memory. Kellen continued, slow and exact. "Preparation isn't about being smarter than other men. It's about leaving room for error. When the math slips, when the season lies, when fear shows up early." He let the silence do its work. "You prepare so a bad guess doesn't kill everyone." Cal nodded once. He understood it then, not as pride, not as victory, but as restraint. The mountain had not been beaten. It had been respected. Above them, the judge remained quiet. That, too, was a decision. The sound came faint at first, metal on stone. Then again, a rhythm that did not belong to the mountain. Everyone froze. Another strike. Closer this time. Purposeful. Outside, the rescue party had been digging in desperation for hours. It was Marshall Hale who saw it first. A tattered scrap of cloth, clinging to the top of the wooden stake Kellen had driven in the spring, now barely cresting the snowpack. It was the only sign, and they had gambled on it. Kellen stood. He moved to the sealed entrance just as a crack of daylight split the dark like a blade. Someone outside gasped, "My God, they're alive!" The opening widened. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. Light poured across beards and hollow eyes. Over the rope on the wall, the small fire still burning as it always had. They stepped out one by one, blinking, unsteady, coated in dust and weeks. Juniper followed last, calm now, steam rising from her flanks. Dawson's Ridge had gathered without knowing why. Men and women stood silent as the survivors emerged from a place they had already buried in their minds. Marshall Hale pushed forward. He took in the shelter entrance, the rope, the calm order behind the chaos. He looked at Kellen Boone and found no joke left to spend. "How?" he asked. "Just that," Cal answered before Kellen could. His voice carried across the snow. "We lived because of Boone's burrow," he said. "The hole we laughed at. It kept us alive." The words landed hard. No one argued, no one laughed. With that testimony, the verdict was finally made public. Snow slid from shoulders. Breath clouded the air. The town stared at the proof standing in front of it, breathing. Kellen said nothing. He looked back once at the dark mouth in the ridge, at the work that had never asked for belief. The mountain had made its ruling. This shelter had been his answer. Evelyn Parlow stood apart from the crowd with her ledger held closed against her coat. The slate behind the counter had been wiped clean, but the habit of counting did not leave her hands. She opened the book and stared at the columns without seeing them. Then she spoke, not to the room, but to the numbers that were no longer there. "If he hadn't done this," she said quietly, "whose name would I be writing down today?" No one answered her. The question had already done its work. Reverend Merritt removed his hat and held it against his chest. His voice carried the weight of reconsideration, not defeat. "I worried about roofs in classrooms," he said. "I was right to. But I forgot something just as plain." He looked toward the ridge. "People who die on that pass are still someone's children." The town absorbed that truth without ceremony. It fit. It hurt. It stayed. Kellen Boone did not step forward. He did not accept hands or words meant to rise into praise. When someone finally asked him what should be done, he answered with the same economy he had always used. "Leave it open," he said, "for the next ones." That was all. The ledger closed. The argument ended. What remained was not a hero to celebrate, but a cost finally understood the price of not preparing, paid by those who never agreed to the risk. They called it Raven's Refuge, and the name was chosen carefully. Neutral, useful, free of stories that might invite pride where caution belonged. Marshall Hale wrote the rules himself. Who checked the shelter? When supplies were replaced? How the entrance stayed marked but never advertised? It became part of the town's quiet work, like mending fences before winter instead of after. Kellen returned to the ridge now and then. Not often. He showed younger men how to feel wind with their backs and read snow by its silence. He taught them to plan for mistakes they could not name yet, to leave room in every calculation for being wrong. Juniper grew gray at the muzzle and slower on the climb. She still made it up the pass, one careful step at a time, and she lived long enough to stand through another winter where no one vanished into white. The shelter waited as it always had, dark, plain, ready, doors open, rope in place, fire scars cold. No plaque was nailed, no statue raised, only a line carved into stone where hands would touch it in the dark. The mountain never argued. It only decided. And in that decision, carried forward without ceremony, lay the kind of wisdom that keeps people alive.